Hi, this is Gil Robles, and I'm going to go ahead and start another watercolor. I've been doing these on my job now. I've been drawing in pencil, but this is more fun just to be able to add other mediums. On my lunch hour on my job, I'm able to close the door to the room that I work in and just use that space privately to go ahead and use that hour to draw or paint and so forth. And this is what I've made a habit of doing on my lunch hour, is just going ahead, close the door, have that private time for myself where I draw or I paint. Lately I've been painting. Ordinarily it's just been a pencil, but I decided to expand what I'm doing. I bring a little tin of watercolors, about 12 what do you call it, 12 wells or whatever, that are in this little tin that I carry around, some brushes, and then I have that time to paint. And this is not the first time I've did it. I've posted watercolors before, but I'm kind of a bit out of practice. There was a time where I was working on my watercolors a lot more, but because of time and space, just I didn't have a lot more space to work at home. That kind of changed on me. But and then there was time, and I was starting to do a lot of digital stuff, which was fine, but I really enjoy doing things like this. So I'm starting the watercolor here. Well, I haven't started yet. I'm going on my pencil sketch. And there's something I've always feel nervous about, is the very beginning of something. It's like how to jumpstart and lay down the things, these lines right. But one of the things is that all of this is guesswork at the beginning, like anything else that I've talked about this before. So even when you start putting down the first lines, you try to be as precise as you can. But what happens is that you're going to change things. You're going to use your eraser. You're going to move things around. You're going to compare it to the other things around it, the eye to the nose to the lips and so forth. And then till you arrive at something that works. I'm always nervous about that. I feel like it looks so awful when I start it. And maybe that's just an indication that I just need to improve the way I start things. But I try to give it a good amount of attention, because I feel like in the very beginning is where you set the tone to how successful the painting is going to be. It's better to have a strong beginning. It's good to have both a strong beginning and an ending to the painting, but the beginning is where you make a lot of your major decisions, where you plan it. Even if you don't put it down on paper, you're planning in your head. It's kind of a strategy of how you're going to put this image down on paper. So you're setting kind of skeletal structure for that. But at least that's the way I look at it. And the beginning is always difficult, and I always feel a little bit, I don't know, shy about it, or not. Maybe that's not the right word, but feel like kind of awkward about showing that to anyone. But that's part of the process of the painting. And what I'm using is Strathmore 400 series paper. It's a good paper. It's a drawing paper, not a sketch. It's not lightweight. But it's not really a heavy sheet of paper. But it takes the watercolors okay. I think that one of the things that I might start doing with this, as long as I have this time, I got to realize also that there's a time constraint. I have 1 hour to do this on my lunch hour, and no longer. I just have to get back to work. So I'm limited as to far as what I can use or how long I can work on the thing and so forth. So it's really a sketch, and this is what I can do within that 1 hour. That's the reason why it isn't like a, I don't know, anything more involved than these quick portraits that I use a reference for. But I want to also maybe try out other things as far as papers are concerned. There are other papers that can be used for watercolor, of course, besides a watercolor paper, which is like I like to use Arches. I like it in 300 pound because it doesn't warp, so I like to get a good heavyweight paper so it doesn't warp on me. Although I'm using this, so I guess that shouldn't be an issue. But I normally use cold press. I have used hot press. A cold press is more grainy and it's got a rough texture, whereas hot press is very smooth. And hot press is actually a great paper for making drawings. I really like to draw on hot press with pencil and so forth. It's a nice smooth paper. But I buy Arches. Arches is a great brand. It's a rag content. It's cotton. Other than that, I would use a Bristol board, which I've used before. As a matter of fact, I was taught that when I was in high school. The teacher I had was Erwin Greenberg, and he started. Initially, we did it on paper like I'm doing here, but then a book came out by Bert Silverman on watercolor paint, not on painting people. And he explained his watercolor method, and also David Levine was another one. It's kind of like they kind of both arrived at the same method. They both knew each other, and so that was one of the things that influenced him, my teacher, and he taught it to his students, and we started using this Bristol board. And what Bristol board is very neat because on regular paper there's some changes that you can make to the watercolor. You can do some lifting of the watercolor, not very much, but if there's any corrections that you need to make with the paint, you can lift some out. But you're kind of limited because you could damage the paper, and also there's some colors that just stain the paper so that they can't come out. Now you can do lifting with paper like this, not much. You can lift colors off of the Arches paper, and Arches paper will take a lot more punishment. But with Bristol board, it comes off a lot more easier. It's a smooth plate finished Bristol board, and what happens is that you can lift up paint a lot easier than you can in regular paper, so that you can play around with the paint a little bit more, and that gives you an added advantage when you use watercolor. Because watercolor can be very unforgiving. There are just a limited amount of changes you can make, but you have to be as precise as possible when you're putting down the color, so that you don't have to lift and you don't have to damage the paper in any way. But if you do have to lift out certain colors, the quality of the paper that you choose would give you would allow for certain options, and also the character of the paper, which is Bristol board having the plate finish, which allows you to lift the paint up and play with it more. Will actually, because of the character of that paper, you'll have that option a lot better than you would in other papers. And I've also used a watercolor board. It's it's like a watercolor sheet, uh, and it's attached to a board. Gosh, I forgot the makers of it. You know what? I'll put it below as far as the materials are concerned, and just include what they are and so forth. But there's a watercolor board that I've used, and I've used it to not really paint in watercolor, but to use gouache, which gouache is like watercolor, but it's not transparent. Gouache is very opaque, so you can and a lot more forgiving than watercolor. It's kind of a cross between watercolor and oil in terms of you being able to build the paint up. So I use these very thick boards and to paint these gouache paintings. And I also add another paint to it, which is casein, which needs you need to be able to use a heavy board to paint on, because on a flimsy piece of paper like this, the casein might crack, but on a stiff board it would be just fine. But this is a watercolor. This is not casein, and this is not gouache. This is transparent watercolor. So I use watercolor board. It's another option. It's kind of like an arches paper attached to a board to make it even heavier and stiffer. As far as the brushes are concerned, I use a lot of different brushes at different times. At one time, I was just buying sable brushes, and that was the recommended brush to use for watercolor, and it's great brush, and you definitely have to have that in your collection of brushes. They can be expensive, but it is definitely a necessity. There's also I like squirrel hair brushes. They're like mop brushes, these real large brushes that hold a lot of paint and a lot of water. And I like using those. So those, and then there's the synthetic hair brush. These are just things that simulate other the natural hair brushes like sable and squirrel, and they do a very good job of it. So you know what, if you shop around for your brushes and you don't have a lot of money for the natural hair brushes like sable or squirrel, it's not a big deal. A lot of synthetic brushes are just as good, and they and you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. Now, of course, I said just as good, but the natural hair brushes are really a lot better. Not a lot better, but what might be correct in saying is the synthetic hair brushes are more than adequate, and you can do really good work with it. So then there's the paints. There's the artist paints. I would say this: with any paints that you get, make sure that what you're getting is artist grade. It's not student grade. It's you want to get a professional paint, because what happens is that if you get anything that's student grade or anything like that, what you're going to have is you're going to have a kind of paint with a lot of fillers and less concentration of pigment. In professional grade watercolors, what you have is you have paints that are more concentrated pigments and less fillers. I like M. Graham watercolors. One of the things that they use is I believe a lot of watercolors use gum arabic or some sort of binder. Graham uses honey. It's a nice mix of paints, kind of nice and thick, and you know, I kind of like that, especially when there's some, not here, but sometimes when I'm painting on heavier paper, to put in the darks, I would use like more pigment, less water. Over here, I did that to a degree, but I was really building it up, the washes. But you know, there are different ways of painting watercolor. There's different different ways of using it. Whether you apply more water, and it's more like what this watercolor's name escapes me now, but he uses this this kind of scale where, you know, the more water you use, the paint is more like tea. You lose a little less water, and it's more like coffee, or a little less is more like cream, and then less more pigment than anything, and it's like honey, you know. So that's how he describes the thickness of the paint when he applies it. Gosh, I wish I could remember the watercolorist's name. He's very popular, very good. Does a lot of landscapes. But maybe next time, or I'll catch it, and I'll include it, links to his stuff in the description below. But again, artist grade watercolors are the way to go here. Anyway, coming close to finishing this, one of the things I wanted to say is that, you know what, I have a Patreon page, and I'm trying to build it up, doing things like this, and exclusively for Patreon, and I'm also working at building a more of a library in my Gumroad page, and which is a video, instructional videos on things like this, watercolor, digital painting, and so forth. And but this is all available on whatever's available on Gumroad is available on for my Patreons on Patreon. So if you like this video, if you like this channel and it has helped you, I just want to encourage you, come and join us on join me on Patreon, and that way there's a lot more videos and sketchbooks and so forth that are available. The sketchbooks are available for download, and the videos are available to watch. A lot more process videos, a lot more instructional videos and so forth, and longer, and I get more involved in it than I do here, because I make it more of a tutorial. But again, and then more images to that I post on there as well. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to pretty much let this play out. It's almost finished anyway. And then just again invite you to join me on Patreon. If you like this video, please hit like, leave comments. I appreciate them a great deal. And so I will leave you shortly with the finished image at the end of this video. All right, thanks a lot. See you on my next video. Bye-bye.